I'm going to talk about a tool that I think is a potentially important one for you in your toolbox in working with achieving the dream colleges. It's called Balanced Scorecards. We have 3 objectives that by the end of this session, a very short one, you will be able to understand greatly the primary use and structure of a balanced scorecard. You should be able to list some of the categories that are relevant for the balanced scorecard that you may want to create for your institution, and you'll understand the aspects of the display of a balanced scorecard. I'm Jan Liddon. I've done seminars and sessions on this topic. I've also helped develop a balanced scorecard for a couple of institutions, both in Achieving the Dream as well as for another institution that uses it quite actively. So I will refer to some of these examples as we go along. Why should we have a balanced scorecard? What does it do for us? Well, we know that we're living in an age where increased accountability is very, very important for all of us. Likewise, we sometimes are swimming in data. We have so much of it, it's hard to really make heads or tails out of what it is that we're doing. So this helps us focus on the important items as well as to look at some of the outcomes that are really most critical in our work. What is a balanced scorecard? Let's think about a car and think about the dashboard of your car. It lists some of the vital things that help you when you're trying to drive the car. It lists your speed, the fuel levels, oil pressure, and your mileage. But it does not list things like a list of things in your trunk or the tire pressure. Those things might be important to monitor at certain times, but not all the time, and certainly not to be able to get you to where you need to go. So let's keep in mind the idea of these kinds of issues when we're trying to design a balanced scorecard. It is a visual display of the most important information that you need to achieve one or more objectives. It fits entirely on one screen or one sheet. Remember that as we go along, and it has to be something you can monitor at a glance. It also needs to be balanced. Let's keep in mind that whole notion of balance. One of the fictional conversations we might have comes from a book that originated the idea of the balanced scorecard, written by Kaplan and Norton. They imagine a conversation with a pilot as they get onto an airplane. The person asked the question of the pilot, says, "I'm surprised to see that you're operating the plane with only a single instrument. What does it measure?" And the pilot answers, "Airspeed. I'm really working on airspeed on this flight." And the person says, "Well, that's good. Airspeed certainly is important. But what about altitude? Wouldn't an altimeter be helpful?" And the pilot says, "Oh, I worked on altitude for the last few flights and I've gotten pretty good about it. So this time I'm really going to concentrate on airspeed." Well, the questioner says, "But I noticed you don't even have a fuel gauge. Wouldn't that be useful too?" And the pilot says, "Well, you're right, fuel is significant, but I can't concentrate on doing too many things at once. So on this flight I'm focusing on airspeed, and once I get to be excellent at airspeed, then I'm going to turn my attention to possible things like fuel consumption on the next set of flights." Well, let me tell you, if we were in that kind of a circumstance, I think we'd probably be jumping off that airplane pretty darn quickly. So what is on a balanced scorecard? What are some of the kinds of things that you should put on it? Well, these are performance indicators. These can come from likely your strategic plan or your Achieving the Dream plan. Under ideal circumstances, those should be one and the same. They certainly should always be items that will help you monitor key decisions or objectives that you're trying to accomplish. These are always highly aggregated data, and they should be limited to 15 or 20 of them. In common parlance, they're called key performance indicators, or KPIs. You'll hear me refer to these throughout. In choosing these, let's think about the parallel situation of when you visit your doctor. If you go for a physical, your doctor monitors a few key items: your blood pressure, your temperature, your heart rate, your cholesterol, and so on. If any one of these is outside the range of normal, something that would be appropriate, then the doctor knows that you need to look further into the causes and the root causes. That's in essence what you're looking at here, is highly aggregated data, the key items that tell you about the health and well-being of your institution. So what are some of these kinds of indicators? I've already referred to the notion of balance. Now these should be a balance of perspectives or categories. There are several classic categories or perspectives that Kaplan and Norton have referred to, and I'll suggest some of these as we go along. They include perspectives such as the student perspective or process perspectives, learning perspectives, and so on. I'll call them categories or perspectives, either one. They need to also be a balance of leading and lagging indicators. Let's think about what it is when we talk about leading and lagging. Lagging indicators are outcomes or outputs that happen after a period of time. Leading indicators are those things that lead up to, or that would be items that are interim indicators that you can monitor and even change at a near-term basis. Again, let's think of an analogy. If you think about weight and diet, somebody who changes the number of calories that they eat will certainly see an impact later on in their weight. It'll either go up or down based on the number of calories that you've consumed. Now, we all know it's not quite that simple. Certainly our weight fluctuates also based on the amount of exercise we have and so on. But it's still, those are examples of leading and lagging indicators that you might want to keep in mind. Who uses a balanced scorecard? That's one of the critical factors that you have to keep in mind. It depends a lot on the organization. Some of them have this used widely, and some of them used only by a few. At one institution that I'm familiar with, the president makes sure that the key decision makers, meaning the president's council and the key executives of the institution, monitor it every single month. In addition, at this institution, the Balanced Scorecard is available on the web so that every employee can monitor it, and the Board of Trustees has access to it so that they're able to look at it. Now, we have to realize that not everything changes every single month. Some things, for example, grades, can only change once in a while. But if you, in fact, they can really only change at the end of every semester. But there are other factors, like, for example, the number of visits to the tutoring center that might change or that you might monitor and record every single month. The most important thing is that the key decision makers need to be able to see what's on it and to be able to review it, and they need to look at it frequently so that they are helping use it in their decision processes. Who uses a balanced scorecard? That's one of the critical factors that you have to keep in mind. It depends a lot on the organization. Some of them have this used widely, and some of them used only by a few. At one institution that I'm familiar with, the president makes sure that the key decision makers, meaning the president's council and the key executives of the institution, monitor it every single month. In addition, at this institution, the Balanced Scorecard is available on the web so that every employee can monitor it, and the Board of Trustees has access to it so that they're able to look at it. Now, we have to realize that not everything changes every single month. Some things, for example, grades, can only change once in a while. But if you, in fact, they can really only change at the end of every semester. But there are other factors, like, for example, the number of visits to the tutoring center that might change or that you might monitor and record every single month. The most important thing is that the key decision makers need to be able to see what's on it and to be able to review it, and they need to look at it frequently so that they are helping use it in their decision processes. Each indicator, then, has several components. First and foremost, of course, is the actual performance expressed in numerical terms. Similarly, it then also has a target or benchmark or objective level, something that we're aiming toward. What are we trying to accomplish? That, for example, might be if our graduation rate at the institution is currently 10% and our target or preferred level is 20%, then those would be the kinds of things that you would show. And then similarly, you would have then the difference between the two expressed in some manner. I'm going to suggest a way that you can do that I call signal values, which indicate something about how far you are from the target or the preferred level. Let's talk a little bit about the categories for the indicators. I've referred to that a little bit before. They can come from your strategic plan goals. In fact, I think that's probably the most important place for those to come from. But in the absence of knowing what your strategic plan is, let's talk about 4 possible perspectives, such as the stakeholder perspective. Those would be things about what is important to these stakeholders or what is important to know about those stakeholders. A process perspective includes what processes an institution will put into place that will affect the strategic objectives or the Achieving the Dream initiative. Learning and innovation. What kinds of organizational learning occurs that will be important for achieving the dream? Many institutions are doing some things in professional development, and the outcomes or effects of those should be measured. And finally, of course, there are resources. What kinds of resources are we going to either expend or are we going to bring in or need in order to be able to do the work that we are trying to accomplish here? Here are some examples of some of the indicators that you might consider in each of these categories. We have things like student satisfaction, student retention and graduation rates, community support. Those might fit into one of these categories. Likewise with processes, we may have things like the time that's required to complete developmental education courses and some efficiency measures and so on. Some other examples include things like the impact of professional development or new programs that have been put into place. And resources, of course, may include things like donations or the grants that we might get to support the work that we're trying to do, and so on. These are only suggestions. You may want to look for other categories and other indicators that are relevant to your institution. Now let's look at a sample of a balanced scorecard. This is actually based on the one that I built that I'm most familiar with. And it begins with the first place with the performance indicators themselves. Most of these have a very, very short definition so that the viewer can see them pretty quickly and see what it is that goes on with it. They also have a hyperlink that allows the person that's using it to quickly go to more detail if they wish to do that, and I will show you how that works in a minute. These are organized by the college's 5 strategic plan goals, as indicated by the Roman numerals on the left-hand column of the balanced scorecard. The performance level for each indicator is indicated with one of 4 colors. These very bright colors are the thing that draw the eye first. Blue, of course, means blue sky. It's above the target. Green means good to go. Yellow means caution and that we probably should begin to be putting into place some interventions. And red means we better pay attention to this right now. Let's stop what we're doing and put into place and think about the kinds of interventions that we need to do to be able to bring the performance level up. Then we have the actual values or the score that the performance occurred. Finally, the target or preferred level, that's the one that sets it at the green level. And then the last column over is the date at which this was updated or the period that was covered so that the viewer can see that this is something that either changes monthly or it does not.